today's video, I'm going to be starting with your chapter number 6, and that is your law of torts. So the law of torts chapter is actually a kind of introduction to civil law. Alright, what do you mean by civil law? As we know it, law itself is divided on the basis of civil law and it is divided on the basis of criminal law. So when we talk about civil laws, tort law forms a very intricate part of civil law. And so in this chapter, we're going to be studying about some principles known as torts. So what exactly is this torts? But friends, before we move on to what exactly a tort is, let me tell you what we're going to be covering in this entire chapter. So this is the helicopter view of your entire chapter. In the first part, you will be studying about definition of torts. So in this is what you're going to be studying in relation to what do you mean by tort and where exactly is it defined. Then for an activity to become a tort, three general rules must be applicable, and those are your general conditions for liability of a tort. Then the third one is known as liability. Under liability, you will be largely studying about three kinds of liability, that is strict liability, absolute liability, and vicarious liability. And then after that, you're going to be studying about very few torts. That is, remember I told you torts are also known as certain principles in law. Now there are multiple principles in torts. You will be studying those torts relating to the personal safety or freedom of a person. So generally under that, around 6 to 7 torts you will be studying about. And finally, there's something known as remedies in torts. That is, if a tort occurs, then what is the remedy that will be applicable for it? So we're moving on to the first part of the chapter, and that is your definition of torts. So 3 people have defined what tort is. So let's go through each one of them individually. The first person is Salmond. Now you may have come across this name Salmond in chapter number 1, that is your schools of thought. Now, Salmond is a natural school thinker plus a positivist school thinker as well as a historical school thinker. But remember I told you Salmond is also known as the father of jurisprudence. Anyways, coming to his definition of what a tort is, he said that tort is a civil wrong. Alright, this is the most important part. Now, he says that the remedy, remember I said that a tort is a type of activity which is also known as a civil wrong. Now the remedy for this civil wrong is something known as unliquidated damages. What do you mean by unliquidated damages? It's very simple. It is basically unspecified monetary compensation. That means an unknown amount of money. So let me break it down to you for you in simple words. There is a property and this property belongs to person B. Now what A does is A trespasses into B's property when he's going for his morning walk. Alright. Now, when A trespassed into B's property, he has committed a tort. Alright. Now, because A has committed the tort, A will now have to pay a kind of compensation to B. And this compensation is only in the form of money. So, is it a specified amount of money? Does the law specifically say that A will have to pay 5,000 rupees or will he have to pay 10,000 rupees? The answer is unknown because the situations may vary. It could be the situation number 1 is that A did not know it was B's property and he mistakenly trespassed into B's property. So at that time, the judge can take that into consideration, and let's say in situation number A, the judge awards he imposes a penalty of 1,000 rupees. Alright, but then there is a situation B. What is the situation B? A intentionally trespassed into B's property to steal some plants or some exotic animals from B's property. In this situation, the court will impose a penalty of 10,000 rupees. Why? Because here it was intentional, right? So that's why the law just says that it is unspecified monetary compensation. What is the legal term for that? It is known as unliquidated damages. Now there is one exception to the definition given by Salmond. He says that tort is not a breach of trust a breach of contract or an equitable obligation. What does this mean? We will come into this in the next topic, so please hold on. So let's start with the next person, and that is Fraser. Now, what does Fraser say? His definition of torts is that it is an infringement of a right in rem against a private individual giving monetary compensation to the injured party. To understand this definition, let's move on to the next part of this PDF. So this is actually another part of the definition, but for the purpose of this video, let us try understanding what a right in rem is and what a right in personam is. So Fraser uses the word right in rem. Alright, so what does that mean? It is simply that every individual, so that means a person A, is given a right. Now, who gives this right? Let's say the government, or in other words, let's call it the state. Okay, the government or the state is giving A a right. Now, this right could be the right to life, the right to equality, the right to freedom of speech, any right it can be. And what the government is stating that when such a right is given to A, then everybody around A, that is any person that A comes in contact with, okay, and I will call these people the general society. Okay, the general society has a duty to protect that right. So where there is a right, there exists a duty to protect that right. Who has the right? A has the right. Who has the duty to protect this right? All the persons of society. Alright. Now, this person over here, he also can have a right. If he has a right, then the rest of the people, including A, has a duty to protect his right. Now, this is known as the right in rem. Now, let's read what right in rem is. An individual has a right. So, that is A has a right. The general public has a duty to protect that right. Who is the general public? All of these people around A. Now, this right is given to the individual by law. So, the government or the state over here is giving this right to A by law. Now, what are the examples of rights? The right to life, the right against trespass, and like I said, the right to freedom of speech and expression, the right to equality, a bunch of rights. Now, this is contrasted to the right in personam. So, what do you mean by the right in personam? Now, unlike the right in rem, the right in personam exists between two individual persons. Okay? There is no government or state who is giving them this right. No, this government is not involved in this right in personam. So, who then gives these rights to these people? A and B create these rights for themselves. Okay, so how do they create these rights? By the formation of contract or even by general promise. Okay, let's assume for a contract, A enters into a contract with B to supply around 10 kgs of grain every 2 weeks. And B agrees. They agree for a price and they say that the 10 kgs of rice will come up to 10,000 rupees per 2 weeks. Now, this is a contract that exists between A and B. When A and B enter into this contract, the rest of society is excluded from this contract. That means society does not have a say in how this contract works. Why? Because A and B created this contract. And as a result, they created their own rights and duties. So what do you mean by rights and duties over here? A ordered 10 kgs of grain from B every 2 weeks, correct? Now A has a duty to pay up money to B. So what is the duty of A? It is to pay some kind of a money. How much money is that? 10,000 rupees. And what is the duty of B? It is to supply the grain. So this is the duty part of it. Now, what about the rights? A has a right to receive these 10 kgs of grain. Okay. And B has a right to receive the 10,000 rupees in money after he supplies the grain. So this creation of rights and duties between two persons by the existence of some kind of a contract or even a verbal or written promise that creates something known as a right in personam. Okay, so only a parties to contract alone have the rights and duties, and these rights and duties are created by these individuals, and that is the example of contract. So if you have to come back to the definition given by Fraser, notice that he says that the tort is an infringement of a right in rem. So what is the right in rem? It is one person has a right and the rest of the world has a duty to protect that right. Now, this is against a private individual. What is against a private individual? An infringement of right in rem. So remember I said that A has the right and this right of A has been infringed. What do you mean by that? Infringement is also known as violation. So if A has the right against trespass, that is A has a property and B trespassed into this property. So B has violated, in other words, infringed A's right in rem against trespass. Alright? And the third part of Fraser's definition is that giving monetary compensation to the injured party. So who must give the monetary compensation to the injured party? B must give the monetary compensation to A. So can you see a similarity between the definition given by Salmond and the definition given by Fraser? Both are saying that it is Salmond is saying that it's a civil wrong. In addition to that, Fraser is saying that it is a violation of right in rem. Then both are similar in the sense that the remedy in common law is some kind of monetary compensation. Now, while Salmond specifies that it is unliquidated, that means it's an unspecified amount, Fraser generally puts forward that it is the remedy must be monetary compensation to the victim. Now let's move on to the third person, and that is Winfield. So he's saying that tort arises from breach of private duty, and this duty must be fixed by law. Duty should be against the other persons of general public, and remedy is unliquidated damages. So let's start from the fourth point, that's the damages part, because all of them are common in one thing, in the sense that Salmond also says unliquidated damages, Fraser also says the same thing, and Winfield also says the same thing. But what about the remaining aspects of Winfield's definition of law? He's saying that tort must arise from breach of private duty. So they are making a distinction between a private wrong and a public wrong. So for that, I'm going to show you all this flowchart over here to understand what exactly is a wrong. Now, wrong itself can be divided into two parts, that is a civil wrong and criminal wrong. Remember I told you the court systems in our country is divided in such a way that you have the Supreme Court at the highest level, you have the high courts under the Supreme Courts, and then you have something known as the lower courts. But these lower courts are divided into civil courts and criminal courts. The same way, why do you approach the court? You approach the court when someone has wronged you and you wish to approach these courts for justice. The same way, there is a differentiation between civil wrong and criminal wrong. Now, this civil wrong is only a tort. And as we studied over here, tort is a civil wrong. Now, this civil wrong itself can be distinguished on the basis of two parts, that is public wrong and private wrong. So, what is public wrong? It is a violation of public law, and these are offenses against the state. So let's take for example rioting. So if you are involved in riots, in violent riots, then this is an offense against the state. Or if you commit treason, or if you commit some kind of terrorist activity against the country, then that is a violation of public law. And these are offenses directly against the state. Whereas private wrongs is basically just a violation of private law, and it's offenses against individuals. So individuals only will have the right against trespass, the right to life, the right of equality. These are individual rights that are given to private people, and therefore tort is a civil wrong, but more importantly it is a private wrong. So friends, now you all must understand Winfield's definition, where he says that tort arises from breach of private duty. That essentially means a private wrong. Now, this duty must be fixed by law. That means the government or the state must give this right to that private individual, and this right must have been violated. And duty should be against other persons of the general public. So, what did I say? If A has the right, then the general public around A has a duty to protect A's right. So, the same thing, only Winfield is saying. So, these are the three definitions of torts that Salmond, Fraser, and Winfield give. But there is one more definition of tort that we need to look at, which we've partly looked at already, and that is the definition given under the Limitation Act. So the Limitation Act of 1963 is a statute, and in that they define what a tort is under Section 2 Clause M of the Limitation Act. So what is Section 2 Clause M saying? It is divided into a two-part structure. The first part is saying that tort is a civil wrong. And as I've already explained to you, a wrong can be distinguished between civil wrong and a criminal wrong. Now, civil wrong can be further classified into public wrong and private wrong, and essentially a tort is a civil wrong. The second part of the definition given under Section 2M is that tort is not a breach of contract or a breach of trust. Now, here we had already done the distinction between the right in rem and the right in personam. A right in rem is where one individual has a right and the rest of society has a duty to protect that right. Whereas right in personam are rights which only exist between two private individuals. In right in rem, the right is given to the individual by the government or by law. Whereas in right in personam, the rights are created by the individuals themselves. So essentially, when we can say that only the right in rem is a tort, whereas a right in personam is breach of trust or breach of contract. Now, when we look at the definitions given by Salmond, Winfield, and Fraser, you can make out that tort is only a right in rem. And that's why the Section 2M of the Limitation Act specifically says that a tort is a civil wrong, but it is not a breach of trust or breach of contract. I hope the definition of tort is very clear to you all. Let's move on to the second part of this chapter, and that is the general conditions for liability of a tort. Now that we've understood what a tort is, now very simply they've said that a tort is a type of civil wrong. Now it's not enough that it is merely a civil wrong. Rather, it has three elements which it needs to satisfy, and those three elements are a wrongful act, legal damage, and legal remedy. So friends, before I move on to the three elements of a tort, let us first understand who are the parties to a suit. You have someone known as a plaintiff, and you have someone known as the defendant. Now remember, I gave the example where I said that A is the person who has a right and each person has a duty to protect this right. Now let's assume that this person over here has violated A's right. So in this situation, who becomes the plaintiff and who becomes the defendant? The person whose rights were violated is the one who will approach the court, and therefore A becomes the plaintiff. And this person over here becomes the defendant. So the plaintiff is the person who is approaching the court for justice and is usually considered to be the victim, whereas the defendant is the wrongdoer. This suit is being filed against such defendant. Now let's come to the first part of the general conditions or liability for a tort, and that is there must be some kind of a wrongful activity or act or omission. So the first part is that the defendant must commit a wrongful act. So who's the defendant over here? This person over here. Alright, he must commit some kind of a wrongful act. Now this act must be legally wrong. So what does this person do over here? He trespasses into A's land. And trespass is punishable by law. So therefore the law says that if anybody trespasses into another person's property, he will be punished by law. And therefore you can say that the activity of trespass is legally wrong. So therefore the defendant must commit a wrongful act and the act must be legally wrong. And the act must harm the legal rights of the victim. So what did A have a right against? He had the right to enjoy his property, and he had the right against trespass. So when this person, the defendant, trespassed into A's property, he violated A's rights and therefore caused harm to A. Now, whether this person trespassed into the property to steal something, or by mistake had entered into the property to had trespassed into his property, doesn't matter. He has violated A's rights. Now, this also includes the word wrongful omission. What do you mean by omission? It simply means that if a person had a legal duty to do something and then didn't end up doing it. That is the example of a lifeguard. What does a lifeguard do? The purpose of a lifeguard itself is to ensure that nobody drowns in the swimming pool or in the sea itself. And if the lifeguard did not go and save the drowning person, that is, he had a duty to save the drowning person, but he didn't. He was busy sleeping or snoring in the chair in the corner. Then, even then, he has committed a tort. Now, many people will ask the question, only if we do something, it becomes a tort. That means we must commit some kind of a wrongful act. If we don't do anything, then it's not necessary, right, for it to become a tort. It's not like that. So where a person has a legal duty, it is very important over here that the words legal duty are looked at. If he had a legal duty to do something and then didn't do it, that is known as a wrongful omission. So the first general condition for a tort is that there must be some kind of a wrongful act or wrongful omission. So friends, the next general condition for a tort is legal damage. Now, let me ask you a question. What if a person, let's say a person A, was selling chocolates? Now, at the time that he was selling chocolates, it was very, very tasty and really, really good. And children from all across were coming to buy A's chocolates. Okay. And looking at A's profitable business, he looks at him and he's like, oh, wow, selling chocolates is such a profitable business. One person B comes and sets up the same chocolate business, which is with a different name. So what happens is some of these people go to B's chocolate shop instead, and thereby decreasing A's profits, and whether increasing B's profits or not, we can't say. But here A's profits are decreasing. So over here, can you say that A's legal rights have been violated? The answer is no. Okay, because the right to profits is not given by law anywhere. No law states that you have the right to a profit. Okay, and what did we study under the first general condition of a tort? That this must be the violation of a right must be legally wrong. And what do we mean by that? That means a right should have been given by law and that law should have been violated. The right to profit is not given by law anywhere, and therefore when B comes and takes away the profits of A, he has not violated any of A's rights. But what has he caused to him? He simply caused him harm. So friends, let's come to the second general conditions of a tort, that is legal damage. Now as you can see over here, there's a two-part distinction over here. Something known as damnum sine injuria and injuria sine damnum. What do you mean by the words damnum and injuria? Now damnum simply means physical harm or physical loss. So I can say over here that the loss of profits is only a kind of physical harm. That means his profits have been hurt, yes, correct, but it is not legally wrong to take away his profits. Whereas an injury is known as a legal injury, and this is a proper violation of rights. Okay, so when they say that there is some kind of a legal damage, they are specifically referring to injuria sine damnum. That is simply that there is legal injury but no physical loss of harm. Whereas damnum sine injuria means that there is physical loss or harm but there is no legal injury. So let's look at each one of them individually. So if you have to look at the first one, that is damnum sine injuria, there is a case known as the Gloucester Grammar School case. Now in this case also, there was actually a school that is it was the only school around in the town, and all the students were going to this school. Now, one of the teachers in the school was not happy with the administration and management, and what he ends up doing is this particular teacher leaves the school and he goes and sets up another school right opposite that of the Gloucester Grammar School, and thereby taking away all the profits of this school. This school filed a suit against this teacher saying that he has taken away profits and therefore caused harm. But then the courts were clear in the case that there was only physical harm caused and no legal injury, and therefore no tort has been committed. The second part of this legal damage is injuria sine damnum, and that is given in the case of Ashby versus White. Now, what happened over here is that there was a polling booth, and on the day of polling, a person was not allowed to vote. Now, no physical harm was caused to him. That means the general inspector in charge of the voting booth did not allow such person to vote. Whereas this person said that no, I have the right to vote and hence I must vote. But he was prevented from doing so. As a result, what this person has done is he has approached as the plaintiff to the court of law, and he has filed a suit against the state stating that my right to vote has been violated. Now, over here, no physical harm has actually been caused to such person. He was not manhandled, he was not hurt, nothing like that. But legal injury was caused to him. Means what? What is legal injury? Some right given to such a person by law, okay, has been violated. And as a result, we can say that a tort has been committed. And finally, friends, we have the third part of the general conditions of tort, and that is legal remedy. Now, there is one saying known as ubi jus ibi remedium. Where there exists a right, there exists a remedy. So we saw that when the law gives a certain right, the law will not simply give a right. In addition to that, they will also give some kind of a remedy. Alright? So this remedy is meant for whom? It is meant for the victim. Now, is it enough that A had a property, B trespassed into such property, and is it enough that if we have to assume that B trespassed into A's property and stole some very expensive items and he went, is it enough to simply punish B by saying that okay, you now have to spend 1 month in prison? It is not enough, because this person A was still hurt by it. He will still require some kind of a compensation, and that remedy is only known as damages. Now, there are many other remedies in tort which we will be studying about in the later part of this chapter, but the remedy is essentially meant for the victim. So friends, this is the general conditions and general conditions for liability of a tort. First, there must be some kind of a wrongful act or omission. Second one, there must be some kind of a legal damage, but this legal damage is making a distinction between physical harm or loss caused to the person as compared to a kind of legal injury. A legal injury is what constitutes a tort, because it is a right given by the state, by law, and that right has been violated. And more importantly, there must be some kind of a legal remedy which is available to the victim in case such violation of rights has happened. So friends, that's all for this video. Do stay tuned in for the remaining videos where I will be completing the remaining part of this chapter. Also, don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and do press that bell icon when you subscribe so that you get personalized notifications when I put out new videos.